Alrighty. I need to start my mic again. Hi guys. What's good? Alrighty. Let's get into this. I tried to record this already and I got halfway through and then someone came to visit my mom and I had to go greet her because I live with my parents. So, yeah. Welcome to the floor of my bedroom in my parents' house and also the site of the Mirror Club. Welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time here, which it's very likely that it is because there's only 2 episodes out, but my name is Buhle Chinhara. I am the host of this show, The Mirror Club, which is essentially about self-knowledge, self-discovery, self-acceptance, and self-transcendence. And basically on this show, I just encourage you guys to really sit with yourselves and think a lot about who you are and come into connection with that, hopefully with the help of some of the topics that we discuss here. So yeah, today what I wanted to speak to you guys about is the ego. And the reason I wanted to speak about this is because when it comes to self-discovery and like really understanding who you are, the ego is something that can kind of muddy that process or maybe like at least complicate it a little bit because of just how wrapped up it is in our sense of self. So I just want to kind of talk about what ego is and really help us to kind of get a grasp on that concept because it's going to come up a lot over the course of this podcast, and learning how to deal with it and dissolve it a little bit is what then helps us to have happier lives and to really understand who we truly are. So, for starters, I think what I first want to speak about is what ego is not, okay? So, ego is just the Latin term for I. And in colloquial, terms and colloquial speech, we typically think of it as like arrogance and pompousness and like overconfidence, narcissism. When we're like, that person has an ego on them, we really just mean like they think that their ish doesn't stink, and typically wrongfully so is what we believe when we say that somebody has an ego. They're too puffed up. That's the idea. But what I actually want to think about is not about it in like the colloquial sense, but more in the psychological sense and in the metaphysical sense. So as I said before, ego is the Latin term for I. So essentially what it is just when you say I am so-and-so, or if I say I am Buhle, it's just everything that is, all the implications and everything that's wrapped up in that statement. It's, my personal beliefs, it's the events that have happened in my life. It's my likes and my dislikes, my personality traits. It's essentially the part of yourself that you consider you. That is what your ego is. So you might be like, okay, so that's what I need to know, that's what the ego is, like that I'm me or I'm who I think I am. Okay, I know that. And no, that's not the point. The reason that you actually have to know what it is because it is your self-image, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that it is a self-image that is accurate or a self-image that is real. It's very illusory. And I'll give you guys the definition that Deepak Chopra gives. And basically he says that the ego is actually your self-image, which is not your true self, but what camouflages your true self with labels, definitions, evaluations, analysis, and judgments. And then Eckhart Tolle says that it's a mind-made self-image. Okay, so it's basically what your mind believes you are. And it's so fickle and so illusory, but it's also built up on a lot of things in terms of your formative experiences and in terms of society at large, right? When it says judgments and analyses, often ego is really this kind of comparative thing where you are what you are because there is something else that's outside of you, because that's what the ego says, right? It's basically what's me and what is not me. So I look at myself and I'm like, okay, I'm me, and then this is a phone, right? This is not me, it's outside of me, and that is what reinforces that I am me, okay? So basically it's comparative in the sense that if you think that you're a nice person, you can't think that you're a nice person unless you have something outside of you to judge that by, right? And you look at one person who maybe just goes around and like calls people racial slurs all the time, right? It's a very a very apropos example for the time. But that person is mean. And the only reason that you know that you are nice is because that person is mean, and they are comparative, right? And this kind of is getting into the sticky area where you start to see how and why the ego is illusory, right? Because it's not based on something that is constant or something that is true. So for example, if you were rich, and this is an example that Eckhart Tolle uses, if you are super duper rich, right, you only know that you're rich because you're comparing yourself to that person who doesn't have as much money as you. But let's say that you lived in a country or an environment where everybody had the exact same amount of money. Yeah, let's say we lived in that type of world. Everyone gets allocated the exact same amount of money, the exact same house, the exact same cars, the exact same clothes, and then that's how they're supposed to live, right? All of your ego attachments of I'm rich, or if you have all the same clothes, I'm stylish, or if you have all the same house, I have great taste. All of that then becomes a lie because you have the exact same stuff as everybody else. So that's kind of where ego becomes a little bit tricky, because it is this comparative thing, and because it's also based on society, it's going to be something that can't last, because society always ebbs and flows in terms of its value judgments, its definitions, this, that, and the other. So yeah, your ego is essentially just your sense of self, who you think that you are. So as we said before, it's not that self-aggrandizing, even though that could be your ego. If you're somebody who thinks that you're better than everybody else, or you're somebody who thinks that you think you're kinder than everybody else, and you think that you're richer and you're more beautiful, whatever, that could constitute your ego. But at the same time, conversely, some people's ego could be, and I can kind of relate to this, very self-deprecating, and could be like, oh, I'm not good at this, or I am, for example, the person who might be like, I'm kind in their ego could also have the ego narrative that's like, and I'm a pushover, because whatever anyone does to me, I take it because it has to kind of stand together with the unkindness. So basically that's just all that it is. There's no like value judgments to it. It's someone thinks they're superior, someone thinks they're inferior. Well, okay, I guess there's that, but then the ego in itself can look like anything. It's not just the self-aggrandizing. So why is this an issue? Why would it be an issue to have an ego? The reason is when you identify too much with these things, these stories about who you are, these things that you have, maybe that make up who you think you are, whether it's a car, or whether it's an achievement, or it's a job, or whatever. The problem with identifying with these things is you're ultimately going to be extremely unhappy because of the fluctuating, ever-changing nature of the world. Your ego is going to be challenged. It's going to implode, have many implosions, and those implosions are going to give you a lot of pain if you identify with the ego, because you basically feel like you're dying, or pieces of you are dying when those things are challenged. So you need to realize that you aren't actually your ego. You are you in essence, and your ego is a part of you. It's a part of your psyche, but you are not that, because the ultimate goal is to have an ego that's less rigid, less judgmental, less attached to ourselves, in order for us to live lives that are kind of free from the bondage of the conditioning and the judgments and everything that have brought your ego to be. So while I was saying that the ego does make up you and who you believe you are and what you are not, the thing that individuates you and kind of all those little bits and arbitrary bits and pieces that you feel make up your whole, right? They have to do with you, but they also influence your perception of the world around you, because this is the thing with the ego. It likes harmony and like congruence. It likes for everything that's within it to make sense. And it always lashes out when things don't seem to be making sense or there's no harmony within itself. So, yeah, basically, in terms of your perception of the world, it has to fit well, I guess, with who you believe that you are, right? So let's say you are a man, right? And your ego, because of the society that you've grown up in and that conditioning, has told you that men are better than women, right? This is just an example. I'm not saying that this is any of you who are watching. Hopefully that's not any of you who are watching. But like I said, because the ego is comparative, it says, all right, I'm a man. Men are better than women. So in my life, the things that are outside of me have to line up with that, right? So that's why you'll see a lot of like misogynists and stuff like that when they're women who are being feminists, well, when they're women who are feminists and they express that and stuff like that, you can see a kind of lashing out, and it's like, no, you women should just be in the kitchen. I feel like this is a very archaic example. I don't know if it's still relevant for now, but there might be some people who still think about it like that. But let's even just take it back a few years or a few decades. If that's what some men were doing, like women belong in the kitchen, women don't belong in the workforce, going against women who are maybe trying to get better rights and the ability to just be more free in this world. That is ego when the person is attacking that person, because their perception and their worldview is that these things that make men superior, right, and make me superior, my ego is kind of rooted in me being part of the superior gender, right? That means that I have to... I hate recording at home. I just keep hearing noises and things, and then I get self-conscious, and it's like irritating. But basically, if my ego is rooted, right, in this idea of who I am, right, and I'm so identified with it that I just blindly believe it, if something comes to challenge that, and it's like, yeah, no, you know what, actually, men are superior, women and men are just equal. And this man's going to be like, no. And he's going to start attacking that woman and be like, you don't even know what you're talking about. You couldn't do half the job that a man does, and this, that, and the other. You don't deserve rights. You don't deserve this and that. And that's because his ego has affected his perception of the world. He has to act externally in the world or perceive things externally in the world in a certain way to maintain the validity of what he's stoked his identity on, right? So when I think about the ego, I like to think of it as an organism. It's part of your psyche, but let's imagine it as an organism that's in your psyche. So with with an organism in general, it has a bunch of different things that it needs to survive. I don't know, I'm getting so distracted by like sensory stimulus. I'm sorry, guys. But it needs certain things for it to survive. So in the same way that you as a human, as an organism, you need things that you feed on. Things that you feed off of, that keep you nourished, keep you healthy, keep you strong. That's the same way the ego works. And what the ego feeds off of is it feeds off of thoughts. It feeds off of an event that happens in your life that it then internalizes and synthesizes into a fundamental characteristic or a fundamental building block of itself, of the identity of the ego. And it'll feed off of, those experiences, those thoughts, what society tells the ego about, whether it's your casing, like, are you a woman, are you a man, are you black, are you white, are you tall, are you beautiful, all of those things that are established via comparison, or like your circumstance, if it's like, are you rich, are you poor, that type of thing. So your ego feeds off of those things. The organism, it's growing, it's strengthening itself. And then, just like an organism, the ego defends itself from things that are potentially going to harm it. So, for example, I'm a human organism. If I see a snake somewhere, I don't know where I'd be where I'd see a snake, but I see one, it's potentially going to hurt me, so I'm going to attack it and potentially kill it. Or if there is, a label for something and it has that poison, skull and bones, I'm going to avoid it and make sure that I'm not involved with it, because that's something that could potentially harm me. And that's the same thing that the ego does as an organism. It attacks, defends, and wants to destroy anything that has the potential of throwing it out of whack and out of loop. So the example that I could give is kind of like a kid, right? And when you're a kid, that's kind of when you start developing your sense of like your ego, right? And a kid is at daycare and they're basically playing with blocks that the daycare, they have their toy box and the kid can come and play with them. And another kid comes along and it picks up one of the blocks, and the first kid just starts having a meltdown. Like they are going out of it. And what do they start screaming? They start screaming, "Mine! It's mine!" Right? They start getting so upset because their ego, which is very attached to, initially they have this kind of very like, not rudimentary, what's the term? Like elementary, there's another word I want to use for it, but a rudimentary understanding of like, what's mine. That's that initial ego growing. And this kid is like freaking out because it has identified itself with the block, because it's like, this is my block. And now that this other kid has come and taken the block, it's challenged that ego idea that like, this is mine. This is something I can do whatever I want with whenever I want with. That's why this kid is having a meltdown, because essentially they're having a little ego death, right? Something has come and interrupted the ego's really rigid idea of what's real and what isn't. And now as the ego is dying, it's showing in the reaction of the child. And the child is like super upset and they can't take it. They can't deal with it. But from that point, the ego grows and it reconstitutes itself, or it reconfigures. And the child learns that like, no, these things maybe don't belong to me. And I can have other things that belong to me and other things that don't. And at the ultimate level of it, you get to the point where you realize that nothing really belongs to you. But then that's a story for another day. But yeah, as we live in the world, people can't belong to you. Things can't belong to you. We've just come to this weird consensus where, sometimes like we've just come to weird consensuses with like capitalism and stuff, where you have these ideas that things belong to you, but that all has to do with ego, and it all buffers the ego. And it's that identification where it's like, I bought this car, it belongs to me, but essentially what the ego is saying is it is me. And that's why the ego goes through crisis whenever those things are challenged. And that actually takes me to marketing, and how marketing really depends on your ego existing, right? Marketers pander to your ego and who you believe you are, because I guess there's knowledge. There's some, I don't know if it's like real knowledge. There's probably psychologists and stuff like that in marketing companies who work on like the psyche of the consumer. But there is knowledge that you identify with things outside of yourself. And that's why whether it's a service or whether it's a tangible product, they're always trying to appeal to who you think you are. So if it's Nike or it's Adidas, they're like, this person thinks that they're cool and they're fit and they're edgy or whatever. So we are going to make them this product, and we're going to make them believe that this is the product that represents the cool person. And that's why they'll put it on an individual who just, I guess, exudes the energy that they want the customer who believes that they exude that energy to try to attain by having this thing and identifying with this thing. And it even goes all the way to like spiritual communities. So, I mean, I consider myself what some might call like a chakrahan. I don't consider myself a chakrahan. People would consider me a chakrahan, and I've just accepted it. But, like ideas of like spirituality, looking for your higher self, looking for your true self, all of that type of thing. And even then, you would think that like in the spiritual community, people have transcended ego because they're aware of what ego is. But there's still marketing towards that type of person, like buy this yoga mat, or buy these crystals, or buy this incense, or buy these tarot cards, or whatever it is. There's still that kind of, and there's so many spiritual sites where they're selling like all this jewelry with like all the right crystals that are going to raise this vibration and do this and that. And there's nothing wrong with having these things, right? There's really nothing wrong with having them. But it's so important to realize what parts of them are your ego being gratified, and your ego trying to identify with something outside of yourself to solidify it. Because that's what the ego is always trying to do. It's always trying to remain kind of unkillable. The ego doesn't want to survive. The ego wants to thrive. It wants to run your entire life. It wants to be at the forefront. Carl Jung describes it as kind of like an attention whore. Like it's so self-focused. It thinks it's all that exists. The ego is egocentric, funny enough to say. So yeah, like I'm saying, I'm not dogging any of those things. I have a couple crystals. I have my tarot card. I have all these things, but it becomes a problem when I identify with those things and I think that those things make up who I am. It even becomes a problem when I identify myself as a spiritual person, because it's just ego. It's not real. I am me at the center of my being. Spirituality is what helps me to discover me. Spirituality does not make me me. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about what fuels ego, or what reinforces ego. Ego is essentially reinforced by your thoughts. It's, like we said, it's a mind-made self-image, and your thoughts attaching to things outside of yourself, bring them in, and then create the ego, and that's what reinforces it. And I guess I just wanted to show you, do an exercise that helps you guys understand how and why exactly the ego feels so real. Because I'm talking to you right now, you might be like, of course I'm me. Like, what are you talking about? Like, how are you saying that my ego is not me? I am all of these things. And I know that you think that because it feels real. It feels like who you are. And it feels like it's something that you could not remove from yourself. I am my experiences. I am my preferences. I am my beliefs. I am all of that. So yeah, let's do this exercise. This woman called Rachel Adams, I'll link you guys to her in the description box. She's really dope. And she works self-mastery and stuff like that. But she led me through this exercise one time. And yeah, let's just do it, and I'll explain it a little bit afterward. But yeah, I want you guys to close your eyes and ignore my cough. So close your eyes, and I want you guys to picture the person in your life that is nearest and dearest to you, the person that you love more than anything in the world. They're so dear to you. You love them so much. They're most valuable to you. And I want you in this moment to think about, their smile. Think about how they make you feel, whether it's happy, excited, all of that. Just think about that and feel how that thought of that person makes you feel. Okay. And now I want to switch to a different visualization. I want you guys to think about whatever it was that you were doing before you started this video. Whether you were cooking, whether you were watching a different video, reading, working, whatever it was that you were doing. I want you to put yourself into that headspace and that place again. So you're doing that. Imagine you're just doing that, minding your own business, paying attention to that thing that you were doing. Then you get a phone call. When you pick up the phone, the voice on the other side of that line tells you that that person who you initially conjured up an image of, that person you love more than anything else, they tell you that that person was involved in an accident. And then they tell you that the accident was fatal. And you're not going to see that person again. I want you guys to sit with the emotions that brings up, with your eyes still closed. Think about how you'd feel. Think about what you're thinking. And really experience that headspace of where you might be if that were to happen. And now I want you guys to open your eyes. Okay. So if you did that process correctly, you might feel a little bit wrecked right now. You might feel really low. You might feel really distraught. You might feel really shocked. But, and I hope that this is the case for most of you, if you look around yourself and you think about your life at this moment, what has changed in this moment now as compared to before I made you guys do that exercise? Is anything different? I'm assuming, and I would hope that that person is still with you and is still right there. Maybe not right there with you, but are still happy and, flourishing, or at least still with us. But you've gone through this emotional process, this heavy emotional upheaval, just thinking about this thing, right? Just thinking about the potential of this thing. And basically what I wanted you guys to do this exercise for is to show you guys how powerful your mind is in generating your state of being, your state of wellness, your state of emotion, and all of that. And it's that same powerful mind which generates your ego. So when Rachel did this with us, she basically wanted to show us that, like, you guys, nothing's happened, but you're having this emotional reaction. And the facts that psychologists have come to see is that when we have emotions that arise from an event, they actually only last 90 seconds. The rest of the emotion that's enduring after that is based off of what our mind is telling itself. So maybe when you're imagining that scenario, you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, what am I going to do without this person? I'll never be able to see them again. I'm going to be so sad without them. This is that. All of these thoughts that kept generating, that kept generating your state of mind. So in the same way, the thoughts that fuel our ego are just as powerful and feel just as real. And because there's something that's a little bit more enduring, like that exercise, we did the exercise and the exercise is done, right? But then those thoughts are typically more permanent, the ones that make up. So thoughts like, I am a failure, or thoughts like, I am unattractive, or thoughts like, I can't do anything right, or even thoughts like, because I'm a kind person, I'm destined for people to take advantage of me, or thoughts like, people never love me, they always leave me. Those things aren't just an exercise that you do once a day. If that's your ego and if you believe that that's who you are, that moves with you throughout the rest of your life, or for as long as you identify with that as part of your ego, for as long as you tell yourself that that's you. And that's why it's so scary that your ego is attached to you like that, and that you identify with these stories that you tell yourself, because those don't need to be the stories that you tell yourself, and those things don't need to be a reality. For example, the ego story that, like, I'm broke, right? You can be broke today and tomorrow you can win the lottery and you're a millionaire. The fact of the matter is the stories that we tell ourselves aren't actually us. The stories that have happened are just circumstances that stand alone in that chunk of time. But sometimes we carry our stories and we cleave onto them with this burden. And as you can imagine, when you are having that experience and all those thoughts were creating certain emotions in you, if you have thoughts that aren't that great, they're going to give you really horrible emotions, and you're just not going to have a good time. And maybe it's a bad example because I am using kind of self-deprecating negative thought forms, but even the thought forms that are, say, good, right? If you think I am the richest, or if you think I am the smartest, or if you think I'm so kind and I'm so nice, or if you think I am so beautiful, at some point somebody is going to come around, right? And they're going to be richer than you. Or someone's going to come around and they're going to make you look dumb in a public setting, in a discussion. Or someone's going to come around and they're going to be like, you're such a bitch, and what you did to me was horrible, and you're a terrible person, And then when you are challenged like that, when your ego, which was built on these external things that you identified with, become challenged, then you fall apart. You end up falling into crisis because these things are not you, but they're fighting so hard to be you. Things that, there's this quote, I can't remember who said it, but nothing that's real, nothing that's unreal can survive, and nothing, you guys know it. I'll put it up so that you guys can see. But that's the truth. The fact is, a lot of the facets that make up your ego, things that are purely egoic, are going to disappear in your life. And that's why we're typically very unhappy, because there's so much flux, there's so much uncertainty. Even right now, if you look at 2020, right? And people had certain jobs that they thought were going to be theirs for the long haul, and they tied up their sense of self within that job. Or people who are like, oh, I'm a travel girl, like I'm the type of person who's on Instagram and I take travel photos and this, that, and they tied up their identity in that, and now travel gone. And it's like, okay, so who am I without this hobby that I used to have, or whatever? Some people identify with their hobbies, and that's when you see that these things are fickle and they're not real. That's why they're illusory. They're not who you actually are. They're just a collection of stories, a collection of really arbitrary and quite limiting things, you know? Because if you think of yourself and you're like, I am this and I am nothing other than this. I'm this person who's like this, that, and the other. It limits you for what you can think about what you want to do tomorrow. Some people who maybe aren't the best people, I say that in quotes because like I've said, all of this stuff is also societally based in terms of our judgments. Tomorrow, something was considered good today can be really bad. But you know, if you tie on to the idea that that's who you are, you might not have incentive to try to do better. If you're someone who's down on yourself, like, you know, I'm just this incapable person, you might not try to do something that you might be really good at because you're not even giving yourself the chance because of the narrative that you've always been telling yourself. Or even if you have the self-aggrandizing things, like, I am so considerate and I'm so great. When somebody challenges you and is like, dude, this is something that you do that's not cool. And we see this a lot right now. We're seeing this a lot right now with the defensiveness that's going on with social justice movements when people, you know, are getting cancelled or whatever it is. And sometimes there are people who jump to the defense and they're like, I wouldn't do that. I would never do that. Blah, 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 blah. Because their egos are wrapped up in being the good person, in being righteous, and being seen as doing the right thing or being on the right side of history. And that can become problematic. That can really become problematic. Yeah, but this collection of stories, yes, I was just talking about the collection of stories and how just being so bound to these collections of stories can be limiting to us. And when I'm talking to you guys, when I'm doing this podcast, my idea is just generally like wanting to make people's lives a little bit better, right? That's why I'm talking about the ego. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to have an identity or it's like terrible, but I think that it's a bad thing when we're so wrapped up in it because that's what causes us a lot of pain. That's what causes us a lot of suffering. I noticed that my ego, when it's challenged, that's when I'm the saddest because I have a hard time accepting, you know, maybe things that have challenged my ego because I'm like, that's not me. And it's like, well, maybe that is you right now and maybe you should deal with it. For example, when I started my journey of introspection and therapy, I remember prior to that, I was just like, I'm such a happy, bubbly person and I'm so mentally stable and nothing can rock me, nothing can shock me, nothing can shake me. And then now I became this really sad person and this really anxious person. And it was an ego death for me. I was shaken. I was shook. I was going through it. And I was like, it was just terrible because I had always for so long identified with this is who I am. I'm a happy person. And now when I was experiencing prolonged sadness or it was depression. I was depressed for many years. When I was now that, I was having an identity crisis because I didn't know who this person was. And it actually took me so long to then do the work on myself because I was denying that I even had issues. It took me too long to go to see a therapist. It took me too long to do work because I'd go to a therapist for a couple of weeks and then it's like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm fine. Because I wanted to identify and drag myself back to that person who I was, back to who my ego thought it was. And that's what will happen to you in your life if you don't recognize that you have your ego. Your ego will live you. Your ego will affect your behavior. Like I said, that your ego can be subconscious. It basically will move you to do things that you might not even necessarily want to do, like in your essence, but because your ego is like, yeah, I'm a reactive person. If somebody crosses me, I'm going to check them, I'm going to deck them. Or if your ego is like, yeah, people leave me, then you might either be someone who never tries in love and, you know, never hopes for love because you think that everyone leaves you, or you might be someone who overextends yourself in love because you're so scared of being left because that's what your ego is always telling you. And yeah, basically I just wanted to do this so that you guys can understand the concept that we're going to be speaking about going forward, that there is an ego and that there is an ego self, and it's good to be aware of it, right? Because once you're aware of yourself, aware of your ego, you start to be able to understand the dysfunctions. You're able to understand like what's going on. You're able to understand the ways that it's reacting and the things that are built up by society but aren't really essential. And the idea for the ego, and you know, sometimes in psychedelics and stuff like that, the idea is for an ego death. And the thing is, your ego is it's never going to leave you. It's the nature of being a human being. You signed up for this when you came into this physical body. So the idea isn't to like dissolve it entirely. even though I guess for some people enlightenment, that is the ultimate goal in the end. But in your day-to-day life, the idea is just to understand that your ego is operational and to be able to observe it from a distance where it's not ruling you, where all of these reactions and all of these beliefs and all of these types of things that feel like they sometimes govern your life and feel like they're essential and they're what exists and what's what, right? You can look at them from a safe distance where you're not getting caught up in the drama and you're not getting hurt by it. That's the idea. The idea is for you to live a happier life that's free of the falsities and the deceptions of the ego. And yeah, today I was speaking mostly about like the falsities that constitute the individual ego, but I will talk about how it kind of can affect the collective as well. I may have spoken a little bit about, like racism and certain things like that, where those bleed into the collective, but there will be a bigger episode that just talks about the ego, its effects in terms of the collective, and also the different ways that the ego tries to survive. It'll come up in other episodes that aren't necessarily to do in the ego, also posts on the social media, so look out for that. And yeah, I hope in all my rambling, there's been somewhat of a concise summing up of what the ego is, and I hope I've conveyed to you guys basically what I'm saying, which is that you shouldn't identify with it, and figuring out what it is, what stories you tell yourself. Sometimes just sit and listen to what your mind is saying, whether it's in an interaction, listen to what it's saying about what's going on, what your place is in the situation, all of that. And yeah, just observe and see when it's not you. There's so much to talk about on this topic. I might just put up an Instagram, like an IGTV video, breaking down anything that I missed, or we might be able to chat about it on a live someday. But my kind of wrapping up and conclusion is something I actually want to read to you that my friend posted today. I don't know, she's a poet, so I don't know if it's her own words, but I feel like I've heard this before. But yeah, it basically said, you must let go of who you are so you can become who you are. And I think that perfectly sums up what these ideas about the ego are that I'm trying to convey. You really need to kind of just let go of all of the stories you've told yourself about who you are, whether they are great and they make you look like a great, amazing person, or whether they're terrible and they're holding you back from being happy or whatever it is. You need to let go of those things because they're all kind of just smoke and mirrors. They're a veil that's kind of distancing you from the truth about your essence, because there's something that's far more essential and far deeper and just far more expansive about who you actually are, your true self. And you really just have to be able to lift off the veil of ego and become less attached to the ego and its stories for you to be able to realize that. So yeah, that's all for today, guys. I don't want to talk your ear off too much, especially since I'm alone. I feel like when I'm alone, I can sometimes ramble. But next week we have a guest. And the week after, and the week after, and indefinitely till I come to a point where I don't have a guest to be able to bounce my thoughts off of. But yeah, I'm really excited to be able to have someone to kind of just like chat with, bounce ideas off of, and continue on this self-discovery journey, guys. Like I said in the last episode, it is a lifelong endeavor. We're in this together for the long haul. So yeah. I hope that this was helpful. If you have any questions, if there's anything that I wasn't clear on, please link down in the comments. Please ask me questions. Comment. Please do like. That would help me a lot. And please do subscribe to the channel because there's going to be a lot of exciting content. This one might have been a bit dense and a bit serious, but and I mean, I guess I like some serious topics, but it's going to be really good. I can promise you that. There's going to be interesting chats. I just don't want to put them out there right now because I don't know why. It's not going to be a surprise. Like, you're not looking for your podcast to surprise you every time, but I kind of do want that to be the case. So yeah, stick around, guys, and also follow the socials. I'm going to put them right here. the magic of editing. And yeah, there's going to be more continued chats. And check out next week's episode. I love you all so much. I hope you have a great week. And for the rest of this week, I guess I just want you guys to observe your ego, observe the narratives that you have in your life, observe all of the things that you think are essentially you, and look at them with a double take and be like, is this thing something that I thought that was fundamentally myself and potentially isn't, and is maybe causing me a little bit more distress than anything, and is maybe holding me back from some things, or is maybe putting myself on a pedestal and superior in comparison to other people when it really shouldn't? Yeah. Anyway, I can continue going on and on, but love you guys. We will chat soon. Bye.
I believe that if we are honest with ourselves, that the most fascinating problem in the world is, who am I? What do you mean? What do you feel when you say the word I? I, myself. I don't think there can be any more fascinating preoccupation than that, because it's so mysterious, it's so elusive.